Hello, everyone. My name is Faisal Khan, and I am the founder of a company called One Extraordinary Life. And we help organizations optimize their talent by helping them create environments of fulfillment, engagement, and resilience for their employees. I am going to be talking today about 5 tips coming from a position of strength during challenging times. And I'm going to be assisted by 2 colleagues and friends of mine, Dr. Kathy Norman, who's the founder of Positive Medicine, so she'll be assisting us, and Kerry Sanderson, Director of Career and Academic Advising at Gateway Community College in Phoenix, Arizona, the first well-being community college. So thank you very much, Kathy and Kerry, for assisting me today. So I've got some rich content that I'm really looking forward to presenting today. And what I'm going to do is go through it. It's going to take about 30 minutes or so to go through it. And then at the end, I'm going to invite questions. So if you have any questions while I'm going through the presentation, please type them in the Q&A section of the chat box. And I understand there's a separate chat area as well. Type in comments or any other questions that you might have in that box as well. And then at the end, I'm going to leave about 10 to 15 minutes for questions and answers, and then we'll address those then. So Kathy and Kerry will help assist with the Q&A section. So with that, let's get started. Okay, so here's the agenda. I'm first going to build a context on what does it actually mean to come from a position of strengths, and what do I particularly mean when I'm referring to strengths in this context. Then I'm going to talk about 5 specific tips. Hopefully you'll be able to apply these tips as soon as you leave today's session. Some tips might resonate with you, some might not. If at least one resonates with you, I'll be happy. But if more do, then all the better. So that will be fantastic. And then we'll end with questions and answers. So let's get started here. So why lead with strengths? So traditional psychology deals with what's wrong with people. You can also say that the traditional medical model also deals with what's wrong in a system. And in organizations, management sciences, a lot of those types of sciences also deal with what's wrong in a system or an organization, unprofitability, etc. The World Health Organization many years ago came out with a statement saying that the absence of illness doesn't mean we're in a state of well-being. The absence of illness doesn't mean we're in a state of well-being. So that means if COVID-19, just like that, by some miracle, disappeared yesterday, disappeared tomorrow, what would happen? Will we be in a position of well-being? So positive psychology attempts to answer this question. If the absence of illness doesn't mean we're in a state of well-being, what does well-being actually mean? And that is what positive psychology tries to provide us an answer for by saying, okay, pathways to well-being, pathways to thriving and fulfillment in life are slightly different than pathways that are just addressing what's wrong or weak in a system. So positive psychology kind of completes the cycle of traditional psychology, whereas traditional focuses on what's wrong, positive psychology focuses on what's right. Now, what does that look like in the current crisis? If we look at a current crisis and we imagine that our well-being can be measured on a number line on a scale rating from -10, where it's really, really low, to 10, where it's really, really high. And let's just say before COVID-19, our measure of well-being was, let's say, 3 or 4. And this will be different for every person. But let's just say for me personally, it was a level 3, for example. Now, because of COVID-19, there's a lot of uncertainty, there's a lot of ambiguity, there's a lot of depletion of energy and different resources of mine. And so that might tend to drag me down. And so what positive psychology says is there's some resources, there's some tools that I can harness that are part of me that can actually bring me up and it will take me to a north of neutral position, because the absence of illness will just put us at a neutral position, and I want to go north of neutral in order to increase my well-being. And the words that you see here in green are examples of that north, or of those things that can take us to a north of neutral position. We call them pathways in the language of well-being. And so what are some of the examples of these pathways? You see some of these here, and these, this is another way of looking at those same pathways. But these aren't the only ones. These are the ones that were pioneered by the founder of positive psychology, Dr. Marty Seligman. However, there are several other models and several other pathways to well-being as well. And different researchers in applied positive psychology come up with these studies that test these pathways and see, okay, how applicable are they? How relevant are they to actually increase our well-being? I'm going to focus on a few of these and give you tips from a few of these pathways. So with that context, these types of pathways are what I'm referring to as coming from a position of strength. When we're able to harness our relationships, harness our emotions, harness meaning in our lives, harness our strengths in our lives, we're able to come from a position that makes it favorable for us to rise to a position that's north of neutral and rise to a position of well-being. So let's get started. The first one is leading with positive emotions. And what do we mean by this? So here are some examples of positive emotions. You can have interest, hope, pride, inspiration, awe. Applying these positive emotions during times of challenge helps us undo the impact of negative emotions. Now, don't get me wrong. I'm not saying ignore negative emotions. Negative emotions are also important. They serve a purpose. And it's not for us to avoid them. In fact, during these challenging times, it's important for us to acknowledge them. We're surrounded by a lot of negative news. There might be some sadness. There might be relatives of ours that might be suffering as a result of COVID-19, whether it's as a result of the disease or the result of the circumstance that they're in now. And so that might result in us experiencing some negative emotions. That's fine. It's natural. But what takes us south of neutral and what drags us down is staying in that negative emotional state. And what Barbara Fredrickson, the world's preeminent researcher in positive emotions, says is by inducing positive emotions, we can undo the impact of negative emotions. And positive emotions have this miraculous ability of actually broadening our awareness in the moment. So literally, our peripheral vision increases when we're in a state of positive emotions. We develop a tendency to develop a flexible way of thinking. We solve problems a little easier than we do when we're in a state of negative emotions. You might have heard of the concept of emotional contagion. For example, one person starts laughing and people around that person start laughing as well, regardless of whether they're in the joke or not. And so this emotional contagion is a very real concept as well. And then there's at least one study that shows positive emotions, when we're induced with positive emotions, it can actually boost the immune system such that it decreases the likelihood of us developing a cold. So then the question becomes, how can we induce positive emotions, especially during these challenging times, so that we can come from a position of strength by undoing the impact of negative emotions and broadening our awareness? One way is to exercise gratitude and gratefulness. And one thing that I'm extremely grateful for during these challenging times is that I'm able to work from home. I'm able to do webinars like this and communicate with the world thanks to technology. So I'm grateful for technology. I'm grateful that I'm surrounded by a supportive community. And so these three good things is an activity that we can undertake where if at the end of the day, we think about the day, we self-reflect a bit and we reflect on the activities of the day, can we come up with at least three things that we're grateful for during that day? So our focus starts to shift from things that are going well, and these don't have to be grandiose things. These can be really simple things, but meaningful and impactful things. You know, had a good conversation with someone, you know, had a good meal, was able to go out and enjoy the sun, those types of things. Another thing that is quite useful in inducing positive emotions is this emotion of love. The emotion of love. Love is a really, really powerful emotion. In fact, Barbara Fredrickson says it encompasses the properties of most other positive emotions: serenity, contentment, inspiration, pride, interest, joy. All of these emotions are encompassed within the master emotion of love. And when researchers in positive emotions want to induce positive emotions in their subjects, they use this meditation oftentimes called loving kindness meditation. Now, you might be familiar with different forms of meditation, and you know, some forms of meditation that are really, really popular are forms of mindfulness meditation. So they're mindful in their practice. Loving kindness meditation, Barbara Fredrickson says, is more of a heart and emotional type of a meditation. So it really opens the heart. And it starts with the self and then expands out to others and then expands out to the world. So let me show you what I mean by that. So here's an example of some statements. These are statements that resonate with me. And so you can Google loving kindness meditation and it will come up with different statements like this. And you can tailor them to your liking. But this is how it works. You take a few moments in a meditative stance, symmetrical position, relaxed, oftentimes with your eyes closed, and you first say these things to yourself about yourself. May I be safe? May I be healthy? May I be protected from dangers? May my heart be filled with love. And you contemplate about that. You think about that for a while. And then you project that out to others. This might be your immediate family, people that are important to you, work colleagues, etc. May you be safe. May you be healthy. You be protected from dangers. May your heart be filled with love. And then you sit with that for a little bit, and then you project that out to a wider circle of others. And in this situation right now in COVID-19, maybe it's the whole world. Maybe it's a community that is slightly larger than the others that you selected before. And it's that wider circle of others that you're projecting this out to. So loving kindness meditation and gratitude are two ways to induce positive emotions to help undo the impact of negative emotions. And I'll encourage you to practice this and see how you find it. Okay. Let's move on to the next point, which is optimism. So first is the emotional space, so the emotions, positive emotions. The second space is more cognitive, and by cognitive, we mean the way that we think and behave. How do we process things mentally? And optimism is really good, especially in challenging times. One might think, oh my God, you know, this is really challenging. And it might become easy to develop a bit of pessimism, especially as we see the spread of the virus going around the world. And so why optimism? Well, number one, we need to develop goals during this time. Goals to, number one, defeat this virus, to overcome these hurdles, to overcome our obstacles, because then we're really coming from a position of strength. We want to conquer this thing, right? And so we have hope. But life would be quite tragic if we had goals but no hope to achieve them. And so one way of generating hope is to adopt an explanatory style, an optimistic explanatory style, what the researchers call. Marty Seligman was the predominant researcher in this regard as well, and he calls it an optimistic explanatory style. And that explanatory style, one of optimism, helps us become more resilient and generate hope. So how do we do that? How do we generate an optimistic explanatory style? Well, it starts by asking ourselves three questions. And the first question is, we understand the cause of the events. And so the cause of these events that we're in right now is COVID-19. And then we question three properties about the causes of those events. Number one, is it my fault? Is it my fault? Actually, it's not. I'm a part of this circumstance and situation, but I didn't cause it. It's not my fault. Is this specific to one situation? Actually, yes, it is. You know, COVID-19 is just one situation that it's specific to, and it's not specific to every other part of my life. My home life, my ability to work, my ability to generate, maintain relationships, it's not impacting any of those types of things. So it's not pervasive. Will it last forever? No, it might seem like it's lasting for a long time. It's not going to last forever, though. We're living in a time where we're taking advantage of so many technologies. All of the world is focused on solving this problem. And so it's not going to last forever. Indeed, that's a very, very likely situation that it's not going to. And so another way that Marty Seligman proposes these three things are, it's not personal. The causes of these events aren't personal. They aren't pervasive. It's just specific to this one situation. And they are temporary. They're not permanent. These things aren't going to, COVID-19 isn't going to last forever. So I encourage you to think about these things and answer these questions in your own mind, because once you do this, what you're going to start to do is take control of the situation cognitively, process the situation in your mind, and start taking control of the situation and think about it in an optimistic manner. And if this isn't going to last forever, it's not your fault, and it's just specific to this one situation, then there's hope that we can beat this thing. And so that type of hope is us coming from an optimistic explanatory style, coming from a position of strength. So think about that, and jot down some notes on how you might generate an optimistic style by considering your context after looking at these three questions. Okay, let's move on to the next section, which is harnessing your strengths. Now, my definition of strengths over here comes from a body of knowledge that's a part of positive psychology. It's called Character, Strengths, and Virtues. And it's a really thick book, heavily researched, and it comprises of a list of 24 strengths. And this is an evolving list. It's likely to change in the future, because strengths and strengths of character, as they term them, can tend to change, and new strengths of character can be added to it. So compassion, for example, is one that isn't specifically defined in that list of 24, but I doubt if anyone would argue that compassion is a strength of character. Empathy is another example of that. But then there are some other specifically listed strengths in that body of knowledge: perseverance, kindness, honesty, creativity, justice, fairness, curiosity, these types of strengths. When we function from a position of strength by embracing these characteristics, these acts of virtue, we start functioning slightly differently than if we weren't to embrace these strengths of character. And what that then does is it allows us to be intentional about our behavior. And the reason we're coming from a position of strength is we become intentional. If I make the intention to be kind, if I make the intention to be compassionate, if I make the intention to be honest, I will function differently than if I don't make that intention. Because now I'm taking control of my behavior that will result because I chose to be intentional about being a certain way. And what the research shows is that increases, because we have that intentionality, we're more likely to be in control of our behavior. And as a result of that, we become more resilient. And there's some interesting studies that show it allows us to feel better. So feeling is more of an emotional state of mind, and function more effectively. That's more of a cognitive and behavioral state of affairs. So it increases that likelihood. And as a result of that, we come from a position of strength, and we increase our well-being, and we move north of neutral. So what does this look like? It's actually a dynamic between being and doing. If I'm just focused on doing things, I'm doing acts, and I might be intentional on the output of the act. I might be intentional about doing the act diligently, but if I focus on who I'm being while I'm doing the act, that's where the position of strength comes in. Am I being kind? Am I being honest? Am I being patient? Am I being compassionate? Am I being empathetic? And this yin-yang between being and doing starts to take shape. And then as a result of that, both being and doing makes us intentional about our actions. And that's when we start behaving differently. So something that I'll encourage you to do is during this time of challenge, as you know, stresses might be piling up, or you might be thinking about things. The one thing we're thinking of is, how do I take control of this situation? And arguably, one of the only things that you might be able to control is the way you think and process a situation. So ask yourself the question, who do I need to be in this moment? Do I need to be more patient? Do I need to be more loving? And then these strengths of being, or what I earlier called strengths of character, can be reflected inwards towards ourselves. I was talking to some physicians earlier on. I do a lot of work with them, and they're right in the midst of COVID-19. And one of them was given a few days off because, you know, they were working like crazy, and the hospital said, you go and take some days off and we'll call you back as the situation starts to peak. And he was feeling guilty, saying, I'm feeling guilty because I want to be out there. And that's this person's passion. However, I encourage them to say, okay, what's the love for yourself? How can you reflect inwards? How can you be fair towards yourself? You need to rest so that you can take care of other people. So that's how we can also reflect these strengths inwards. So our position of being impacts the way we do things for ourselves as well. So that's coming from a position of strength. That's taking us north of neutral and improving our well-being. Okay. This is the list of the 24 strengths that I mentioned earlier, which is part of that body of knowledge called Character Strengths of Virtue. So, and then this, you know, is likely to evolve. More strengths are probably going to come in here. There might be other strengths that aren't on this list that resonate with you. Be that version of yourself, because that's a stronger version of yourself, and that's what we're vying for. And the headings that you see here in orange are these categories, virtue categories, 6 categories of virtue, and these are loosely coupled groupings of these strengths by virtue category here. Okay, let's move on to the next tip. And this tip is about relationships and drawing from relationships. It's a really difficult time for many of us as we're socially isolated, and naturally, inherently, we're not born to live in isolation. There's several studies that show we are social beings, and that's how we thrive in life. In fact, the simplest definition of positive psychology by one of its founders, Chris Peterson, is that other people matter. We thrive when we're amongst other people. In fact, if I were to ask you, think about the most joyous moments of your life, or when you felt your best, the likelihood is that you'll think of examples when you were surrounded by other people or with other people. And so relationships are key. And when we're in challenging times, coming from a position of strength is realizing the power in those relationships. And sometimes we're locked with family members, and you know, we might be butting heads with them, they might be getting on our nerves, etc. Or if we're working, for example, if you're working in a hospital environment or wherever you might be, things might get tense and stressful. And so acknowledging the value that you see in other people shows those other people that they matter to you. It's one of the best things we could do, is to show another person, hey, you matter to me. brings us closer. Here's how you matter to me. That's the value. Here's what you're doing that's helping me. You're just being here with me helps me. You being on the other side of the screen, showing support for me, helps me. Seeing the value in others and telling them about that value that you see in others is an important way to bond and take advantage of the relationships that we have. Most times we just complain to other people. This is the opposite of that. You're telling them why you love them, why they're important to you, how they're adding value to you. Practice other focused listening. Again, it's not just about you, it's about the other person. When they're talking to you, how are you focusing on them and their saying? You're thinking about them. And the last portion here, seek support where needed. Then it's about us. Hey, I need support, help me. And I work with a lot of leaders, and some leaders during these circumstances, they don't know how to act. They feel very vulnerable during this challenging time when people are coming to them for solutions, and they feel vulnerable saying, hey, actually, I need your help instead. And so how can you be courageous and brave? Maybe be, leading into strength, be brave and conquer that vulnerability and ask for support. Because at the end of the day, it's relationships that will support us. And so these are some ways in which we can come from a position of strength by being there for other people and relationships that we have, and then extending and ask for help where we might need that ourselves. That's coming from a position of strength when we're seeking support from other people, because it's inherent, it's within us. We're social creatures. Okay, so something worth thinking about. Who can you appreciate and to be grateful for and show that they're adding value? And then who can you ask for help during this time? That was a fourth point. Let's now move to the final point. And if you see me looking down, if you're looking at my clock over here, because my whole screen shows the presentation. And so I just want to be respectful of everyone's time here. And so the fifth point here is identify the meaning in your actions, the meaning in your actions. So we are undertaking different actions right now in different capacities, and it might become difficult for us to understand the context. What is the meaning of all of this? Why is this happening to us? These questions are quite natural for us. Viktor Frankl wrote a book, Man's Search for Meaning, and it spurred a lot of research on this topic, the topic of meaning. What's meaningfulness in our lives? And Marty Seligman says meaning is one of the pathways to well-being. Right? Living a meaningful life. Right? What does that mean? Under extreme adversity, meaning can be a source of strength. What does that look like? During COVID-19, we can ask ourselves, am I part of something bigger? So in my case, it's causing me to stop and think, it just makes me realize my role in the world and in the universe. What is it? I'm a small cog in this vastness. And so I am a part of something bigger. In the, split second, the whole world can be engulfed in such a crisis. It's quite extraordinary. It just helps put things in context. Am I part of something bigger? In your space, what is that? Something bigger that you're a part of. Another way of looking at this might be, am I a part of a certain community? If you're a healthcare provider, then maybe that's your community, right? So I'm a part of the MAPP community. It's one of the communities I belong to, MAPP, Masters of Applied Positive Psychology. So I'm a part of that community. Your community might be your family, right? Might be the people that you work with, might be your neighborhood, whatever that is. How am I making sense of this? How am I making sense of this? What narrative am I building? What story am I telling myself about this situation? How am I making sense? And then lastly, am I exercising a calling? What's my purpose in all of this? So my purpose during COVID-19 is to churn out blogs and conduct these webinars and coach people and help organizations the best that I can, right, during the situation. Emily Isfahani Smith, colleague and friend of mine, terms these four words that you see in green over here: transcendence, belonging, storytelling, and purpose, as four pillars of meaning. And so take a look at these questions. You know, am I part of something bigger? Is something bigger going on? Sometimes awe-inspiring actions are bigger. So you see healthcare providers doing a lot of work. It's awe-inspiring, it's transcendent. Am I belonging to a certain community? What story am I telling myself about this situation? Am I able to exercise a certain purpose of mine during these times? It's a good way of understanding the meaning whilst we're facing this crisis. And once we understand that, it allows us to step into that meaning and come from a position of strength. And that's what's taking us north of neutral and improving our well-being. So in closing here, what we want to do as we start to come from a position of strength is we want to lead with positive emotions as opposed to negative. We want to generate an optimistic explanatory style as opposed to a pessimistic. We want to harness our strengths by focusing on who we are being, not just what we're doing. We want to draw from our relationships by acknowledging the value in the relationships that we have and asking for support. And then lastly, we want to see how we might be able to determine the meaning of all of this. I will end there. It's just been about half an hour, and open it up for questions. And then I'll ask Kerry and Kathy to help me out with the questions. We'll take 10-15 minutes for that.
Faisal, so Kerry and I were noticing that there are enough in the audience. I wonder if you feel comfortable maybe unmuting. We had a question from, I think, Angela.
Okay, all right, sure. So if there aren't many questions in the Q&A, we can certainly open it and unmute people and they can ask questions live. No worries.
Yeah, well, we actually have some questions. We were just going to give you that option, but I can just go ahead. It's certainly up to you.
Okay, yeah, so let's go through the ones that have been asked first, and then we will then pause for just a second. We'll unmute everyone, and then people can ask questions live as well.
Okay, the
Great.
First question: is it possible to feel both positive and negative at the same time?
So Barbara Fredrickson says that actually that's not possible. You can experience one after the other, but normally it's just one that you're experiencing at one point in time. And that was the basis of her undoing hypothesis of positive emotions. So the short answer of that is no. You experience the majority of one emotion that overcomes you, and that's why the positive can undo the impact of the negative. What the research shows is, however, the quantity of the emotions might be different. So the research shows it takes more positive emotions to undo the impact of negative emotions. There's no exact ratio behind this. It's subjective and it's different to every individual. But what we find is you need more positive emotions to undo the impact of negative. So that's the answer.
So I'd like to jump in because we do have a comment by Andrea. So thank you, Andrea, for the comment in the chat line. I'm just going to read it to you. She states that I really think we do ourselves a big disservice by labeling emotions as negative, or sadness, grief, and anger negative. Not necessarily. And maybe for Tom, but not for Alice. I believe we do better if we don't put a value judgment label on our emotions. And then she asked for any comments from you.
Yeah, that's a good comment. I agree with you there. Thank you for raising that. I believe the name you mentioned was Andrea. Thank you. Yes. Now, the term negative and positive emotions is what the researchers use. So it's not something that I have created. And so if you look at the literature, that's how they name it. It's unfortunate, I agree. Labeling these things becomes quite difficult, but researchers normally label these so that we have a definition and the clear distinctions. And within the research, it's all about the nuance. And we can pick apart some of the nuances of these things by labeling them. I don't want people to leave today's session thinking that negative emotions are bad. As I said earlier, negative emotions too serve a purpose. If I'm feeling sad, or if I'm feeling grief, or if I'm feeling a sense of loss, for example, there's a reason for that. It allows us as human beings to bond with each other. And Todd Kashdan has written a book called The Upside of Your Dark Side. And he speaks a lot about the upside of negative emotions in that book. So they definitely serve a purpose. I think coming from a position of strength in the context of positive psychology and positive emotions, what I'm saying is, if the negative emotions are dragging us down and we're getting into a downward spiral, when now it's starting to cause things like anxiety, maybe it's causing a bit of depression, and you're unable to pull out of there and taking us north of neutral, one pathway to do that is to embrace positive emotions. But you're very right, both serve a purpose. In fact, you don't want to experience positive emotions at the expense of negative emotions and not face those as well. So this notion of positive psychology is not just about embracing the positive. It's about embracing the good aspects of both the positive and the negative. A very insightful question. Thank you very much for asking that. I hope I answered it to your satisfaction.
Okay, our next question is from Kathy, who asks, when in such a charged time, do you have a recommendation for how best to sway the teeter-totter from negative to positive, putting the weight over to positive from negative?
Yeah, I think it's asking ourselves the question, what evidence do I have to support whatever thoughts I'm entertaining in my mind? And so, yeah, we can have sabotaging thoughts, the teeter-totter of thoughts, occupying our mind. And we have a thing called negativity bias. And sometimes it takes a grip of our mind, and it's really difficult to let go of that and undo that. But taking a pause, taking a mindful moment, maybe taking a deep breath, and allowing our emotions to settle a bit, and then questioning the thoughts that are going through our minds might allow us to do a realistic, not a fantasy, a realistic reappraisal of our thoughts and put things in proper context. And that's where things like the explanatory style that I mentioned might be able to help.
Thank you. Another question is, how can I help my kids manage this craziness?
Ah, yes. Yeah. So I think some of the same tools that we discussed here today, you can take advantage of some of those tools. There's a lot of information out there from the body of positive psychology, body of knowledge, that's specific to kids. Angela Duckworth does some great work for kids, Character Lab. I believe it's characterlab.org. But if you search Angela Duckworth, that is really good. There's a book called, I believe it's called The Parenting Switch by Lee Waters, L-E-A Waters, and she talks about positive parenting. And so you can get some good tips, techniques, skills on how to apply pathways from positive psychology towards kids. But during these challenging times, helping them understand, depending on the age of the kid, obviously, putting things in perspective for them, and allowing them to embrace the situation the best they can, but then explaining things to them in their terms, perhaps through games or doing activities with them, can help them switch from a negative state to a more positive state, especially as kids are locked in the house these days. I'm going to switch the screen to my contact details just before you ask the next question, Kathy or Kerry. I have a blog on my website. It's COVID-19. I'm doing video blogs, and I'm adding content to that every week. So please feel free to take advantage of that, and share, and also my contact details. Even after this session, if you have any lingering questions or thoughts, please do get in touch. I'd love to hear from you. But yes, please, Kathy, Kerry, please continue the questions.
Thank you, Faisal. I just wanted to say that Andrea posted in the chat, thank you so much for your answer to her question. And another question is that you had mentioned having a calling, and how do we know what our calling is, and just how do we know that it's our calling?
Yeah, you know, it's what the research shows is if we try to hunt for meaning in life, it actually takes away from the experience, and the likelihood of just you know, searching for meaning and finding it is a bit difficult. Normally people stumble on meaning, and it's moments like this where we reflect and something might occur to us. So the intention behind the 4 pillars of meaning isn't that, you know, we will definitely find one of these if we look for it. The intention is, my intention was to just plant some vocabulary, some language in your mind that will start building some kind of a framework on what meaning might look like. And what the research shows is it's a combination of different things. So how significant is this to you? Significant meaning, how important is it? How interested are you? How much of a personality, how much of your personality and identity resonates with this thing, right? How do you comprehend the situation, and what's your relationship to it? So those are some other guiding points that help us determine the level of meaningfulness that we might see in something. And so trying different things, and then as a result of that, something resonates with us so much that it might become meaningful for us. So Mihai Csikszentmihalyi wrote a great book called Flow. And in that book, he has a whole chapter dedicated towards meaning. And he recommends trying different things, seeing which things engage us so much that they absorb our attention, and we get in this state called flow, where another term for it is being in the zone. And maybe that's calling like, maybe that's something that's fulfilling a purpose in us because it's so resonant with us. So it's a really difficult question to answer. It's subjective for everyone. And most times we just stumble on it by trying new and different things. So that's what I'll encourage you to do in pursuing a purpose or a calling.
Faisal, I think we have time for one more question,
Okay.
and I have a participant that would like to ask her question to you live.
Wonderful.
I think in the last answer, you may have touched on it a little bit, but do you mind unmuting?
No, not at all. Can you unmute?
And it's Zoey Green who would like to ask
Zoe,
the question.
yes. Thank you, Zoe. Ask your question, please. Welcome. I think we can't hear Zoe.
Just waiting to see if she types anything for us.
Am I supposed to mute, or can you mute?
I cannot. You have to do it.
Oh, really? Okay, hold on a second. Okay. So 1 second, Zoe. Bear with me just 1 minute. I don't see Zoe on here.
Her last name is Green.
Oh yeah, I do see you. Sorry about that. Allowed to talk.
Zoe, unmute yourself.
Yes, I did.
Very good.
So I wanted to say thank you.
You're welcome.
And, also, you know, to echo the previous question, it is very much something that is supported by the research, and a lot of people do proclaim, you know, that after they find their purpose, or when they can contribute to others, when they're able to serve, that it is very fulfilling and that they feel connected. And I am really not sure what to do in terms of, you said experimenting with things in order to find a purpose, but do you have any other recommendations about discovering whether or not you're part of something bigger, what your purpose is, and whether or not you're exercising some kind of calling? Especially in a situation like we're in now, it's even more difficult, I think, to go out and try different experiences. And I'm a person also, you know, who has experimented a lot in my life, and I still feel like it's like I'm in a void. I don't have a connection to some kind of purpose or greater community that's landed.
Yeah. And so let me give an example, and perhaps this will illustrate something. So the first thing I'm going to suggest is that you contemplate and think, and don't think with the intention, I need to find a meaning. Because what the research shows is that's counterproductive.
Hello?
I think we lost Faisal.
Oh no.
Right in the middle of the answer.
Like the answers of life.
I know. I think he's back. He's coming back. Are you back? You're muted, Faisal.
Unmute yourself.
Hello, where did I lose you?
Oh, phew.
Oh,
I
at
don't
the
know what
very
happened.
beginning. You said don't try too hard. The research shows us that when we try, it can be counterproductive.
Yeah, it can be counterproductive. And so, you know, I think this is this might be a good time to just sit with yourself, and not with the intention to find meaning, but to think about things, contemplate things, and see what bubbles up. And when things start to surface and bubble up, you might find that either one of those 4 pillars of meaning, something starting to make sense. The book that Emily Isfahani Smith has written, Power of Meaning, gives some really powerful stories and examples of how people have discovered meaning in their lives, and examples across the 4 pillars. But the one example I'd like to give on the types of meaning and the level of meaningfulness. So meaningfulness can indeed be grandiose, right? So a surgeon operating a patient and saving a patient's life is certainly very fulfilling and might be very meaningful for that surgeon. But let's say 2 surgeons are walking towards a hospital in the morning for their duty. One surgeon might think, oh my God, yeah, there's a good nip in the air. It's 7 o'clock in the morning and I normally drive to work, but I'm walking with a colleague, we're building relationships, and I'm looking forward to a really good, productive day at the hospital today. Surgeon, right? That's meaningful. It's meaningful to that surgeon because that's what he's aspiring towards. That's just that surgeon's purpose in that moment for that time. The other surgeon might be thinking, oh my God, yeah, I'm, you know, just completing my fellowship. I am, you know, a preeminent surgeon in this community. I'm going to develop this new medical device and change the world. And that's why I'm going to the hospital. So that surgeon has a different level of meaningfulness from that activity. So the same activity, both walking to the hospital, has very different meanings for those 2 different people. And so if you sit and think about the activities that you're doing and the things that you're a part of, what's the significance of those things? How do you relate to them? How do you comprehend those things? You might start forming some ideas, and things might start becoming more meaningful to you. So that's, you know, just some food for thought on the differences of meaningfulness. They don't have to be grandiose. For some people, it's a combination of several small levels of meaning. And then the book by Emily Isfahani Smith is really good. Michael Steger is one of the world's foremost researchers on meaningfulness as well. Take a look at some of his research and papers, and they might be able to help. I hope that was helpful, Zoe.
You know, that was probably one of the most helpful answers I've ever received. So thank you so much.
If you have any lingering questions, please do reach out to me. I really appreciate this time with you, and stay safe, everyone. Stay healthy. And I hope that you're able to come from a position of strength during these challenging times.